Today we've got some unexpected changes to the unit coherency rule. A small change, but it's going to make some long straggly conga line units far harder to use than they were before. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we've been covering the 9th edition rules changes as they've been coming out. Today we've got another couple of significant changes to a core rule of the game, which basically means enormous infantry units aren't going to be fielded in long straight lines anymore. The practice, often known as conga-lining, basically meant that you could have an enormous coverage of ground with an infantry unit. Even something as small as a 10-man squad with maximum unit coherency could cover around 25 inches of table space, potentially chaining all the way back to a character or an objective, while most of the unit was somewhere completely different. I think it was an element of the game that broke immersion a little bit, particularly when you saw huge units such as Chaos Plague Bearers, or Orc Boys or Gretchen adopting some really weird formations on the board, just literally to daisy chain back to enemy characters or onto objectives. So let's talk about the change then and how it's going to work. So this is previewed in the Genestealer Cult article that Games Workshop posted today, and this rule very much comes in two halves. First there's the unit coherency rules, and then should you not be in favour of these rules, should you be breaking them, then you have a unit coherency check which appears to happen in the morale phase, which we'll get onto in a second. These unit coherency rules do have a few important differences to how they were previously. Before, basically each model in the unit would just have to be within 2 inches of one other model in the unit, and the unit would have to be a consistent whole on top of that. You couldn't randomly have 2 units next to each other on one side of the board, and 2 models on the other side within 2 inches of each other. Basically, if you have 6 models or more within the unit, then they need to be within 2 inches of at least 2 other models now, rather than 1. They need to end each move in this way, and if for some reason they do manage to be not in coherency for some reason or another, and they can't move back into this coherency, then it means that they can't move at all. That bit is pretty much the same as the current coherency rules, but obviously they have this additional restriction for larger units. I've got a couple of examples just to highlight what this means. Basically, in the first case at the top there, we have a 6-man unit of Space Marines, so this will be applying those rules. All of these guys are 2 inches apart from each other, and it means that this one falls foul of the new unit coherency rules because the ones on the end are only within 2 inches of one other model, whereas all the ones in the middle are within 2 inches of 2 of them. Now with your Space Marine squad, you're going to need to adopt a bit more of a formation like the one shown below, where every single model in the unit is within 2 inches of at least 2 other models. It means that big units like this are essentially going to be sort of fighting in 2 ranks rather than in 1 rank, as you can see at the top, or of course an enormous blob when there's loads of them all clumped together. On top of this, the unit coherency rules have also clarified adding models to units type rules, which is quite a common mechanic for any sort of healing mechanics in the game, and it just says that you have to set them up within coherency, and basically if you can't set them up then they're destroyed. Also, as an aside, in terms of coherency on multiple levels of terrain, say in ruins for example, they've changed the vertical distance to 5 inches rather than 6 inches, as typically I believe that 3 inches is the normal distance between ruin levels, so the 5 inches distance quite happily and comfortably accommodates people in first floor ruins, but won't quite reach to second floor ruins, so under normal circumstances you're not going to be able to spread out your squad across 2 floors that are 2 levels apart. If these rules were just as they stood, however, then you can technically use this clever formation to pretty much circumvent the rules, but Games Workshop have thought around this and also added a unit coherency check to prevent this sort of thing. In this formation, every single model is technically within 2 inches of 2 models, even though the vast majority of the unit is really strung out. However, this is super vulnerable to the unit coherency test if they do happen to lose a casualty. Now, they haven't fully explained exactly how this unit coherency check works. I'm sure we'll find out more in the 9th edition book, but we do have the core rule, and from the context I think we can apply how it's going to work. Basically in those bullet points down at the bottom, it is basically saying that this happens in the morale phase after you've made morale tests. It sounds like every unit on the table is going to have to test coherency each turn as well as morale, and if you're out of coherency then it's very punitive indeed. If your unit does happen to be out of coherency, then you must remove models one at a time until the unit is back in coherency again. They count as being destroyed, but don't trigger any other rules that are used when a model is destroyed. For example, they specifically call out that you don't have to take another morale test after that you've removed these models. This does mean that if you position your models badly and you put them out of coherency, then any models that aren't in coherency will basically be destroyed at the end of this phase. It sounds like you very much do have to get it right on unit positioning. Could be a little bit tricky to think through the implications of this if you are using big units or trying to set up some sort of fancy clever positioning. In general, this is going to mean that you're not going to be wanting to conga-line your forces out at all, at the risk of taking some casualties and then losing a fair amount of the unit to this test. It also means that you can't do the slightly weird practice that I've seen used in tournament games from time to time, where you have an enormous horde unit. The player who's controlling the horde unit takes all the casualties from the centre of the unit, meaning that the last few stragglers of the unit could both be simultaneously within the aura of a character on one side of the board, on an objective on another side of the board, and also potentially be in combat with another unit a long way away. Very weird things could happen in 8th edition when you had an enormous unit and you took the casualties away in a bit of a gamey way. That strategy is just not going to be a thing anymore thanks to this unit coherency check. If you do weird things like that, then large chunks of the unit are just going to be removed. Going back to this slightly strange example, it does mean that if the Space Marine squad takes one casualty anywhere in the unit, and then it gets that unit coherency check, then the controlling player will have to remove Marines one at a time until the unit's down to under 5 models. I think in this case, losing 1 Marine if you take this formation and try and game the system means that you'll be guaranteed to lose another 4 Marines no matter which way they're positioned. It really does mean that you have to embrace the actual fighting in 2 ranks part in bigger units, otherwise you're going to have individual models isolated and then lose them through the coherency test. So what does this mean going forward in 9th edition then? Rather unfortunately, it does seem like it's another nerf to large units, both through the way that it'll be restricted positioning. You're not going to be able to daisy chain out anywhere near as far as you could before, and anything with 6 models or more will feel this effect. Probably the thing that I like least about it is that it allows for mistakes through casualty removal. Basically, if you make some dumb decisions with taking out the wrong models in the shooting phase, for example, you could well be losing more models as a result in that unit coherency test. I think that this will be an issue where people make a slight error there, and then their opponent points that out in the coherency test, and then the player who made the mistake will lose a bunch more models just because they've been a bit careless. Not maybe the worst thing ever in high-level competitive play, but not the best feeling ever for a more casual game. If you're playing with units that do have to adhere to these rules, so 6 models or more, then it's going to be harder to conga line back to characters and onto objectives. Those big blobs will be functioning a lot more like blobs, or at least fighting in 2 ranks, so any conga lines they do create will be about half as long. You'll also need to be removing the models more from the end of these formations if they're maximally spread out, rather than leaving big gaps in the middle that you can just close ranks on when you have your next movement phase. It's also going to have a pretty big impact on infantry unit screening. Big units such as this Gretchen mob on the right is just going to cover less ground than it did before. It's less likely that a few 10-man infantry squads are going to screen out your entire deployment zone from things like reserves or deep strike. As those units quite so commonly did that job, it's actually going to be a relative buff to things like reserve, deep strike and assault armies, as it means that you will have slightly more room to come in on the board, and the opponents are going to have to spend more resources in terms of models on the table to screen the same amount of area. I think it's a relative buff to assault armies as well, because screening can certainly get in the way of your assault units getting into the core of the enemy army, and if you just block them off with long screening units, then it's just not going to get there. If screening is a little bit harder to do because you can't conga line the units out, then it's going to be easier to get through the gaps. Basically, I do think that this is another nerf to the slightly larger infantry squads, which have already had a bit of a setback with those new blast rules. It's looking like 5-man or less infantry squads are definitely going to be a lot more incentivized compared with how they were before. You can basically have your unit coherency pretty similar to before, except just having to make sure that everyone's in coherency at the end of the phase, but you'll still be able to spread out to that maximum 2-inch length to do maximal screening, and it also means that you won't be falling foul of the blast weapon special rules. So overall, I think I'm a bit on the fence as to how much I like this change. I do think it does a very effective job of dealing with conga lines and the strange positioning situations that you could sometimes get in 8th, but on the other hand it does seem to be a fair bit more of a faff, making sure that all the models in the unit are within 2 inches of 2 models. I think it does have the potential to create some bad feeling. If someone does make a mistake, leaves their unit out of coherency, then their opponent says, well, all of those models are dead now. In addition, I'm not really sure that large units needed any more nerfs in 9th edition. We definitely still need to wait for the full picture, but from what we know so far, it's still not looking great. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Are you a fan, are you not? And do you think this might change the way that you field certain units in your army? If you want to keep up with more of the 9th edition updates as they come out, I'll certainly be covering them on the channel, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more. I also have a Patreon page which helps support the channel, as making all of these videos does take quite a long time, and the Patreon is what allows me to spend this time away from working on a regular job. If you've been enjoying the content recently, then any support is massively appreciated. As well as supporting the channel patrons get to see certain videos early each week, they get regular voting on what sort of videos we'd like to see next on the channel, and there's various other benefits such as names in the credits and extra roles on the channel's Discord server as well. If any of that interests you, or you just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. And a big thank you to all of you guys who are supporting, it really does make a difference. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.